everybody, it's Emily at ARG Schooling, and today I'm going to be filming my top 10 books that I read in 2018. I had a really good reading year. I am really pleased with the books that I read. And I read a lot this year, but I read some really great stuff. I hardly had any 1 or 2 star reviews, so that's pretty awesome. But I read a lot of 5 stars. I read a lot of really great books this year, so I narrowed down my list to 10, which was hard. But these are the top 10 books I read. These are not in any particular order. I loved them all the same. They're all my children. So let's get started. The first book on my list I don't have a physical copy of because I read it as an ebook. Big Little Lies by Liane Moriarty. I loved that story so much. It was the first book I've ever read by her, and I immediately went out and bought more of her books, which of course I have not picked up yet, but I fully intend to. And I just found it really compelling. I could not put it down. It was great. You should all read it. I went and watched the miniseries on HBO after, and I liked that a lot too, but I still think the book was just really great on its own. The next book on my list is Thunderhead by Neal Shusterman. Is anyone surprised? I just am obsessed with the series. I am so excited for the next book. I don't know when it's going to come out. I keep hearing buzz about 2019, but there's no official release date, so I'm hopeful that I get it next year, but I don't know. This series is amazing. You should all read it. It's about a utopian world in which we've evolved to live forever, and the only way to control the population is for people who are scythes to murder people. So this is the continuation of the series. In the first book you meet the characters who are training to become scythes, and in this book things just go crazy, and the ending is maybe one of the best cliffhanger endings I've ever read ever. So go get this. If you haven't read it yet, you have to. Read all the Neal Shusterman. The next book I want to talk about is The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. This is actually one of the books that I said I wanted to read in 2018 and I actually did. And I'm so glad I finally picked this up. I've had it for a while on my TBR, and I finally got to it, and it was excellent. It deserves all the hype. I really thought this was great. It's a science fiction space opera, but I felt very much like this was almost a spin-off somehow of Firefly. It felt very Firefly-esque to me, and I loved that about it. I love the characters. It's very character-driven. There's not actually a lot of plot. There's just enough plot to keep the story going, but it's really more about the people, or the beings, I should say, that live aboard the Wayfarer. And yeah, it was just wonderful. It made me smile almost the whole way through. I loved it. The next book I want to talk about is Rebel Queen by Michelle Moran, and again, this is the first time I read anything by Michelle Moran, and I seriously need to buy all of her books because this was excellent. This is historical fiction about when Great Britain was colonizing India at the very beginnings of that, and how the Indian people tried to fight back, and it follows a queen, Lakshmi, and her bodyguard women who were called the Durga Dal. I'm sure I'm saying that wrong because it's been a while since I read it, but they were just these badass women that protected the queen, and they were very smart and knowledgeable, and they were great fighters, and they had to train. It was a really interesting look into that culture and how they dealt with the clash of cultures with Great Britain coming in, and I just thought it was excellent historical fiction, and I want to read more by this author. The next book, again, I don't have a copy because I read it as an ebook, and that was Allegedly by Tiffany D. Jackson, and I thought this book was just so compelling. I literally had to keep reading. I usually read on my Kindle at night when I'm in bed and it's dark, and I'm trying to get myself to where I can fall asleep, and reading just kind of helps to soothe me and relax me, and this book did the opposite. I would find myself like, it's now midnight, I need to put this book down and go to sleep, but I couldn't because I had to know what was happening. This is the most plot twisty story about a girl who was accused of murdering a baby when she was a child, and how she was basically raised in the prison system, and I found it both disturbing and fascinating. As soon as I thought I knew what was happening, everything got changed around, and I thought it was really great. I want to read more by Tiffany D. Jackson because I just thought Allegedly was insane. Next on my list is Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi. And again, this book was just so good. It follows different perspectives through each chapter. So you're following these generations of people who lived in, I think, is it Ghana? Yeah, who lived in Ghana, like from the beginning of when the English were coming in and taking people for slaves. And so you follow one line of the family who stays in Ghana, and the other line of the family is taken as slaves and they go to America. And I was so drawn into this story and following these people, and I worried at first that it was gonna like pull me out of the story every time I had to change characters, but honestly, every single character in this book, I was able to get into their mind, and I knew who everybody was. I never felt like everyone sounded the same or anything like that. It was just fascinating to see how these people's lives were upturned and changed completely by the British coming in, and the slave trade, just the Atlantic slave trade destroyed so many lives. And I found this book so important, so interesting, and so well written. Everyone should read it. Next up is The Last Days of Night by Graham Moore. I was surprised by this book. I knew it was going to be good. I just didn't expect to really enjoy it as much as I did. I thought this was going to be a pretty boring but well-written book, but I was never bored. I found this to be well-written and really interesting, and I was in the story. And this is about the beginnings of electricity and Thomas Edison and his fight with everybody else who was trying to create light bulbs and bring electricity to the world. And you follow Paul Cravath, who is the young lawyer who takes on this case with George Westinghouse to sue Thomas Edison. And you see like the insanity and the politics and all of the corruption and all of that. But you also really get a great view of New York City in the late 1800s, and it was really, really good. And I would recommend this to anyone who enjoys historical fiction, no matter what time period you think you like the best. I thought this was really great, and it really kind of set me off on a path to wanting to read more books that take place in this time period. Hence my creation of the Gilded Age reading crate. Next up, I have The Librarian of Auschwitz by Antonio Iturbe. This book was one of my favorites of the whole year. Out of all of the books I read, if I had to pick just one or two that were my top favorite, this would be on that list. This book was beautiful and so sad. It was just so good. I've read like hundreds of books that take place during the Holocaust. It's not like a new territory for me. So going into a new book about that time period, I tend to think that it's not gonna do anything for me anymore because I know this story. But even though I do know the story, I saw new things that I've never seen before, and I've heard different perspectives, and like I've never heard of The Librarian of Auschwitz. This is a true story about Dita Kraus, who was a girl who survives the Holocaust, and she was the librarian in Auschwitz. They had a secret library because and this is another thing that I'd heard about but never read about, was the whole idea of they had these show camps that they would allow people to see because they wanted to show that the Germans weren't killing people, they were treating them well. See, look how healthy they are. They had a school, they had all these things. There were children in this camp. But it was still a concentration camp. And you get to see what that camp was like, and it was still awful. It was not like they had anything better than anyone else. They might have had slightly more food, but barely even that. They were still starving to death, and they were still dying of disease. And it was still horrible. And just the characters in the story, oh, I can't even talk about it without getting upset. Like, I feel emotions. But Dita was just amazing. She is my new hero. She was such a badass. To be able to like hide the books and to maintain that, but also just to survive the awful things that she went through, to survive it and to come out on the other side of it still human. I can't even imagine what that would be like. This book is beautiful. Everyone should read it. I only have 2 more books left. The second to last book I want to talk about is These Shallow Graves by Jennifer Donnelly. I've been raving about this recently, so I'm not going to go too into depth with it because if you've seen any of my videos in the last couple of months, you've heard me mention it. This is about a girl who lives in New York City in the very early 1900s, and she is a debutante, and she's destined to live this sort of life where she marries another wealthy person and they continue on with their balls and their fancy parties and dinner parties and all of those things that she's used to her whole life. But she also really wants to be a journalist, and she really looks up to Nellie Bly and wants to do that. When her father is mysteriously killed, she decides to go in and investigate, and she goes on this whole, it's amazing. The story is really well done. I really want to read more Jennifer Donnelly. That's like my theme this year, picking up new authors and like I need to read all their books and then not being able to do that. It makes me sad, but I cannot read all the things. But I just thought this book was fascinating. The characters were all really well put together. Everything about this just made me just excited. I felt so excited the whole time I was reading it. Like, I need to know what happens next. And the last book in my list, but by no means the least, My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. I found this book so much fun. So good. It's so nostalgic. I loved all the 80s that was in this story. The chapter titles are all lyrics from 80s songs. Just everything about this was just my favorite. So I love when a book makes me nostalgic and for a time period, or just I love 80s everything. And this was just great. I could see it in my head as a movie. I would love to see it as a movie. That would be a great book to adapt. I think it would work really well. I love that this was not so much an exorcism as an exploration of friendship, and when people start to grow apart after a certain amount of time as friends, like it's inevitable that people will grow apart and grow back together, and I loved seeing that in the story. I just thought this was so good. And while I just said it's not about the exorcism, it is. There is exorcism stuff, but I felt like it was almost more Mean Girls and that sort of thing, like Heathers, than an actual exorcism is what you would picture that to be. But there's still some really creepy stuff in this story, and like one scene in particular that will haunt me for the rest of my life. But I loved it, and everyone who enjoys a good story and likes a little bit of horror but not too much horror, I think you'd like this. So those are my favorite books of 2018. There's a lot more that I could have added to this list, but I had to limit myself. I wanted to keep it at 10. I did read a lot of great stuff this year though. What are your favorite books that you read in 2018? I would love to hear about it. Let's chat about it in the comments down below. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you guys in my next video. Happy reading. Bye.